Chapter 1: The Tracks of Childhood. From the earliest years of his life, Luan Andrade displayed an unusual connection to speed. While other children ran around the backyard just for fun, he would chart imaginary circuits on the clay paths of the family farm, mentally timing each lap and analyzing his movements with a focus that bordered on obsession. His lean, agile feet seemed to glide over the red earth, tracing invisible curves and straights with the command of someone born to race. At the age of 9, he received a worn-out pair of running shoes from an uncle who lived in the city and participated in amateur marathons. The shoes were 2 sizes too big, their soles worn thin, the sides faded with time, but for Luan, they were sacred relics. He spent his afternoons running between rows of cassava, setting up circuits with plastic bottles and wood scraps. It was there, amid the distant crowing of roosters and the strong smell of damp soil, that he lost himself in his dreams. His father, Marcos, watched with a mix of pride and concern. He himself had once been a cart mechanic in his youth, a career he gave up when the local garage closed and family life took over. Even so, his eyes lit up when he saw Luan run. There was something unspoken in their bond, a father who never fully lived out his speed-filled dreams, and a son who seemed made of wind. By the time Luan turned 14, he was competing in local school races. Despite having no resources, no coaching, and no professional gear, he regularly took the podium. He had no supplements or elite training programs, just willpower and a strange, almost animalistic resilience. The sound of his own heart pumping became his anthem. Adrenaline, his fuel. He ran like he was escaping something invisible, perhaps the reality of a simple life, where dreams often withered in the cracks of necessity. At a regional youth meet, a scout from a major sports development center in Campinas noticed him. He was a stern-looking man with sharp eyes who approached Marcos after the race and spoke of a scholarship opportunity. Luan would have to move, live in an athletic dormitory, and adapt to a new life. That night, Luan barely slept. He imagined himself wearing an official team uniform, competing around the world, representing Brazil, being celebrated. A few months later, Luan moved to Campinas. His days were now filled with training, physio sessions, nutrition planning, and scheduled rest. Pain became routine, but so did the sense of purpose. Coaches saw raw talent in him, something natural that couldn't be taught. His lap times kept dropping. His name was whispered more often in junior athletic circles. Then fate, always unyielding, took a sharp turn. It happened during a hill sprint drill on a cloudy morning. Luan felt a sharp snap in his right hamstring, as though something had torn inside. He tried to keep going, pure instinct, but his leg gave out. He fell sideways, skidding across the asphalt. His cry echoed off the nearby slopes, drawing urgent attention from the staff. The diagnosis came quickly and brutally: a severe muscle rupture. Surgery was inevitable. Recovery would take months. And even then, the future was uncertain. The news crushed him. He grew silent. Coaches tried to comfort him, but he responded with vague nods. He didn't cry in front of anyone, but at night, curled under his sheets in the dorm, the emptiness inside him spilled over. When he returned home weeks later, now walking with crutches and bearing a hollow expression, something had shifted in his eyes. No longer bright, just quietly defeated. Marcos tried to engage him, to suggest new possibilities, but Luan seemed unreachable. He stayed in his room, staring at the old medals stored in a dusty box. Then came Camila, his childhood friend. She visited often, bringing books, food, or just quiet company. One day, she brought something different: a second-hand racing wheel and pedals, connected to a laptop. She said it was hers but insisted he try it out. Luan scoffed. How could a game fill the void left by real racing? Still, perhaps out of boredom or politeness, he agreed. That night, for the first time in weeks, he booted up the simulator. He chose a random track, put on his headphones, and gripped the wheel. The virtual car surged forward. The tires screeched. The curves demanded focus. And suddenly, he felt something stir inside. It wasn't real, of course. Not the wind, not the ground, not the thudding of feet. But it was fast, it was immersive, and it was racing. From that night on, something shifted. Luan began to smile again, if only faintly. His eyes sparkled in front of the screen. He still limped, still went to physical therapy, but his spirit, once buried in grief, was now picking up speed once more. In pixels, yes, but real enough for him. In that quiet bedroom, where once only sorrow echoed, the roar of virtual engines now rumbled in the air. A new path was revealing itself on the horizon. And though Luan couldn't yet fully see where it would lead, he had started moving forward again. In the glow of the monitor, Luan races on, but across the web, someone is watching. Someone who recognizes in him the raw potential of a true champion. Chapter 2: Racing with Ghosts. The Andrade household, once filled with rustic sounds and hurried footsteps, had settled into an unusual calm. The clinking of tools from Marcos's garage, the barking of distant dogs, even the whistle of wind against the clothesline now seemed muffled under the new silence that had taken hold of Luan, who spent most of his days confined to his room, face lit by the blue glow of his computer screen. Since Camila had lent him the simulator, something had awakened inside him. That digital sensation, once perceived as a childish distraction, had become strangely real. The virtual tracks were now territories he craved to master. There were no crutches beside him during a race. His weakened right leg wasn't a problem there. In that pixel-lit world, he could be whole again. The room, once covered in posters of athletes and dusty medals, began to evolve. Camila helped him set up a more functional sim rig, improvising wooden crates to elevate the pedals and adjusting screen brightness. Soon, Luan knew every shortcut of the simulation software as if they were the corners of his old training field. He studied tracks, analyzed telemetry, and dedicated hours to mastering each circuit. He began streaming his races for a few friends. At first, the audience was small, but encouraging comments started to appear. Some called him naturally talented. Others asked if he was new to the scene. One particular message stood out. It came from an odd-sounding profile, Ghost Driver 21, saying he had potential, but he needed to learn to race not just with the body, but with the mind. That intrigued him. Who was this Ghost Driver? After some digging, Luan discovered he was one of Brazil's top sim racers, Thiago Moretti, a renowned influencer in the virtual racing world. He was known for his icy focus and strategic streams where he analyzed decisions in real time while dueling with national champions. Luan didn't understand why someone of that level would be interested in a rookie like him, but something stirred inside. A flicker of hope, long dormant. In the days that followed, Luan ramped up his training. The races became increasingly technical. He started entering small amateur online tournaments, facing competitors from across Brazil. Defeats came often, but he treated them as lessons. He took notes, reviewed replays, watched Thiago's videos, and compared lines, braking techniques, tire management strategies. The obsession he once had with real races had now found a new playground. Marcos watched from a distance, still unconvinced. He saw his son spending hours in front of a screen, twisting a toy-like steering wheel as if it could ever replace the feeling of pounding feet and windswept turns. At night, he told his wife, in hushed tones, that it saddened him to see the boy trapped in an illusion. To him, virtual racing would never be real. But he said nothing to Luan. He didn't want to extinguish the only flame his son seemed to have rekindled. Late at night, as Luan raced online, he began noticing patterns. Every time he streamed, Ghost Driver was there. Sometimes spectating, other times competing under different usernames. It felt like he was being tested, pushed. Ghost Driver laid subtle traps on the track, provoked risky overtakes, recreated extreme conditions. Luan wasn't sure if he was imagining it, but he felt watched. And it only made him more determined. In a qualifying event for the National Sim Racing League, Luan faced over 200 competitors. He placed among the top 20. For the first time, his username L.Andrade Racer appeared on the official championship roster. This wasn't just another casual race. It would be broadcasted live, with prize money and sponsors involved. Nerves clamped his stomach. His palms sweated as in the days of physical sprints. His heart pounded the same rhythm. The night before the event, Luan received a direct message: "Are you ready to race with ghosts?" The sender, Ghost Driver 21. Attached was a private video call link. Luan hesitated, took a breath, clicked. On the screen, Tiago Moretti appeared, smiling subtly, as if he had known this moment would come. He explained that he had been following Luan for weeks, that there was something in the way he raced that reminded him of the greats. But he warned him, the virtual world demanded more than talent. It required emotional control, game sense, mental endurance. The best knew how to lose, how to adapt, how to fall and rise again. Luan listened in silence, absorbing every word like a disciple at the feet of a master. When the call ended, all doubt vanished. He was on a new track now, one where the obstacles weren't visible, but just as formidable. That night, while the city slept, Luan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, he felt that his injured body hadn't marked the end of his journey. It had only redefined the starting line. And with the cursor blinking on the simulator screen, waiting for his next login, he gripped the wheel tightly. He wasn't just a boy distracting himself anymore. He was a driver, a racer, a true competitor in a world where limits had been redrawn, and he was ready to race. At the National League debut, Luan will face not only the country's best virtual drivers, but also the pressure to prove that his place on the track is just as valid as in the real world. Chapter 3. On the Grid of Resilience. The sun rose slowly, painting the walls of Luan's room in warm tones of orange, but he didn't see the dawn. His eyes were locked on the still dark monitor screen, where a digital countdown showed only a few hours until the start of the National Sim Racing League. This wasn't just another race, it was a turning point. More than a shot at glory, it was his chance to prove that he hadn't been defeated, just rerouted. Everything around him had been meticulously prepared. The ergonomic chair, adjusted for perfect posture. The wheel, calibrated to the millimeter. The monitor, set to full resolution, displaying the track he had memorized through countless sleepless nights. Every curve, every braking point, every gear change had become second nature. In the kitchen, Marcos prepared breakfast in silence. The smell of strong coffee mingled with that of bread toasting in a pan. Though still skeptical about the digital world, he couldn't deny that something had changed in Luan. The same focus he once showed before a real race now radiated from behind a screen. And that, more than understanding, was beginning to earn his respect. Luan didn't touch the food. A protein bar and a few sips of water were all he needed. His mind allowed no distractions. On the screen, racers began to enter the virtual lobby one by one. Big names, iconic figures in the national sim racing scene, filled the chat with nicknames, emojis, and greetings. Luan remained silent. Anxiety coiled in his stomach like a caged beast, but his expression was stone. When the countdown hit 0, the digital track opened in a roar of light and sound. The simulated engines growled with near realism. The first lap would be for qualifying only. Luan focused on a clean lap, no risks, no excess. He placed among the top 10. A huge feat for a debut. The livestream chat lit up. "Who's this L.Andrade racer? The kid runs like it's in his blood." He saw the messages, but ignored them. No time for ego. The race began with a visceral jolt. Luan felt the pressure on his arms as his virtual car surged forward. Rivals lined up like predators, waiting for a mistake. The first minutes were chaos. One favorite crashed on the second curve, dragging two others. Luan dodged by mere centimeters, heart pounding. He needed rhythm. Behind him, a driver named Speed Ronnie kept pushing, braking late and attempting reckless overtakes. Luan stayed calm. He adopted a defensive line, easing the throttle with surgical control. Everything he'd learned, videos, replays, Thiago's tips, was now in play. Midway through the race, strategies began to unfold. Some drivers pitted early for fresh tires. Luan stretched his stint to the limit. That risky decision began to pay off. The track cleared. He climbed positions. By lap 17, he was fourth. A tiny mistake from the second-place driver opened a door. Luan didn't hesitate. He slipped through the gap with ghost-like precision. The crowd in the stream chat erupted. Camila, watching from the room next door, almost spilled her juice when she saw him on the virtual podium. She knew how much that position meant. First place seemed unreachable. Storm Valley, the two-time champion, led with a comfortable gap. But a traction loss in a crucial curve brought Luan within a second. This was it. In the final lap, the track breathed with him. Each corner, each braking point was a delicate dance of control and aggression. Luan took a bold inside line on the penultimate turn, reducing the distance. In the final stretch, the two cars were side by side. Victory slipped away by milliseconds. But Luan crossed the finish line in second. And in that moment, soaked in sweat in front of a screen, he felt like a champion. The results confirmed it. P2, L. Andrade Racer. The league's live stream highlighted his performance as the most impressive debut of the season. Thiago Moretti posted a replay of the key overtake with the caption, "The future has arrived." And it's from the countryside. Marcos entered the room in silence. He saw his son with headphones still on, sweaty, trembling, eyes filled with tears. He said nothing, just placed a hand on Luan's shoulder and nodded. It was the gesture Luan had been waiting for since he'd come home injured. And in that quiet moment, father and son finally shared the same track again. With sponsors and professional teams now knocking at his door, Luan must decide if he's ready to turn this new world into a real career, and how that choice will affect his family forever. Chapter 4. Invitations and Conflicts. Luan's performance in the National League wasn't just a brief success. It was an explosion. Within 24 hours, his name was circulating in major forums and sim racing channels. Clips of the race, especially the overtake that secured his second place, were replayed thousands of times. On social media, fans and experts alike debated who this rookie from the countryside was and how he delivered such an extraordinary performance without any prior official competitions. Luan, who had always kept a low profile, was stunned by the speed at which his life shifted. Every new notification on his phone carried weight. Gaming peripheral brands, tech companies, and even a professional eSports team reached out with partnership proposals, test invitations, and sponsorship offers. But among the flurry of opportunities, one offer stood out, a professional eSports organization based in Curitiba. They offered structured training, a dedicated facility, access to sports psychology and physiotherapy, and a full salary with performance bonuses. It wasn't just a contract, it was a career. Luan stared at the proposal for hours. He knew this might be the chance to turn his digital passion into something real. But accepting it meant moving again. Leaving home once more. Leaving his father, who had only recently started to understand and support his new path. Leaving Camila, who had been a pillar throughout his recovery. And more than anything, it meant confronting the fact that his dream of physical running was truly over. Marcos noticed the shift in Luan's mood, even if no words were spoken. At dinner, Luan barely touched his plate, pushing rice from one side to the other. Marcos attempted to start a conversation, but the tension was thick. In the end, they ate in silence. Back in his room, Luan reopened the proposal. He read every detail, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He remembered Thiago Moretti's advice, the long hours of training, the thrill of crossing the virtual finish line. This was real. The emotions he felt during a race weren't fabricated, they were true. And that truth mattered. The next day, Camila showed up with 2 cups of acai and a curious smile. She already knew about the offer, of course. The online buzz had made it impossible to ignore. Luan laid out the pros and cons, trying to justify his doubts. She listened patiently, and when he finished, she told him he had no right to limit himself out of fear. She reminded him how he had come back to life when he began racing again, even if only in front of a screen. She said racing wasn't what he did. It was who he was. Her words echoed in his mind that night. For the first time, he dreamed not of running on his legs, but inside a simulator cockpit. Surrounded by lights. Cheered by a digital crowd. And most of all, whole. The following morning, Luan invited his father to sit on the porch. They remained quiet for several minutes, watching the field stretch into the horizon in gold and green. Luan spoke calmly, explained the offer, the expectations, the implications. He said he didn't want to leave without his father understanding that this wasn't a goodbye, it was just another path forward. Marcos listened without interruption, his eyes fixed on the horizon. When Luan finished, he simply said that even when dreams change shape, what matters is staying true to the essence. And if this was Luan's road, he would run beside him, even from afar. That was all Luan needed to hear. A week later, he packed a few clothes, his racing gear, and boarded a bus to Curitiba. The city was fast-paced, cold, and unlike anything he had known. The team's facility was a marvel, high-end equipment, private sim stations, analysis rooms. Other drivers, already used to the professional rhythm, were skeptical at first. But after 2 training sessions, they understood, this kid was different. He raced like he needed air to survive. Like every lap was a declaration. Luan began training 6 hours a day. He participated in strategy meetings, reviewed telemetry, and performed reflex drills. On weekends, he raced in qualifiers and small tournaments. His name kept rising. He wasn't just an emerging talent anymore, he was a real contender. Yet, even with all the excitement, Luan couldn't ignore the quiet emptiness that crept in at night. He missed the sound of his father's voice in the morning, the smell of fresh coffee, Camila's quiet presence. Success had a cost. But he knew that to run farther, you had to leave familiar roads behind. In his first international tournament as a pro, Luan faces a mysterious rival who seems to know far more about his past than expected, testing not just his skill, but his emotional strength. Chapter 5. Shadows on the Track. The roar of simulated engines filled the silent auditorium. Spotlights reflected off rows of racers, each one focused on their personal monitor, headphones tight, eyes fixed on the upcoming digital curves. The room felt more like a sanctuary than a stadium. Luan, now wearing his official team jersey, could feel the weight of the moment anchoring his chest. This was his first international competition, broadcast across more than 20 countries. But more than a showcase of skill, it was a personal milestone. Proof that he had come back from the edge. The virtual circuit was a replica of Silverstone, with every trap and tradition perfectly reproduced. Luan had trained obsessively for this. He knew the track down to the grain. Where he could gain milliseconds, where others slipped up, where tire grip had to be treated like a wild animal. Yet that morning, as he reviewed the list of racers in the qualifying round, one particular name made him freeze, Phantom_07. He had never heard of them, and neither had his teammates. Yet this driver's ranking was alarmingly high. It was as if they'd appeared out of nowhere, a ghost in the system. In the qualifying session, Luan posted the 3rd best lap, a clean and precise run. Phantom placed 2nd. Their lap had been aggressive, flawless, as if they knew the track on an instinctual level. There was something unsettling in their driving style. Something familiar. But Luan couldn't place it. The main race began with a clean start. Luan held on to third while Phantom and a French veteran named Deveau fought for the lead. Luan stayed behind them, quietly studying. While Deveau was calculated and textbook, Phantom was unpredictable. Their braking was always late, but never too late. Their attacks were bold, but never reckless. There was a fluidity to their movements that reminded Luan of himself. A message came from his tactical engineer: "This guy races like you. He's a mirror." The sentence echoed in Luan's mind. A mirror. Yes, that was it. Phantom raced like him. The same timing, the same balance of aggression and control. This couldn't be coincidence. As the race progressed, the battle intensified. Competitors fell behind, but Phantom and Luan surged ahead, locked in a dance of high-speed chess. The live stream audience was ecstatic. Comments in multiple languages filled the screen, celebrating what they called the duel of the season. The decisive moment came on the penultimate lap. In Stowe Corner, Phantom exited with slightly less traction, just enough for Luan to close the gap. He made his move, diving into the inside line, braked just in time, and made the pass. Their cars brushed, lightly but legally, and Luan pulled ahead. The race ended with Luan in first, Phantom second, Deveau third. It was Luan's first international victory. He raised his arms in triumph in front of a screen, but the emotions were as real as if he had crossed a physical finish line. In the digital podium room, the avatars of the top 3 drivers appeared side by side. But what struck Luan was Phantom's final act. Their avatar turned toward him and bowed, before instantly logging off. No goodbye. No trace left behind. Later, reviewing the footage, Luan discovered that Phantom_07's account had been deleted minutes after the race. No profile history. No stats. Nothing. Just a perfect performance and a silent exit. That night, he received an anonymous message. "You've learned to race with your body, then with your mind. Now race with your soul. The next track lies within." This time, Luan didn't feel afraid. He smiled. At peace. Maybe Phantom had never been another person. Maybe it had always been a shadow of himself. Haunted by Phantom and challenged to face his inner wounds, Luan sets off on a journey of healing that takes him back to his roots, where the race is no longer against time, but against silence. Chapter 6. Invisible Races. The victory over Phantom_07 had left a strange taste in Luan's mouth. Though he had climbed to the top of an international podium, something within him remained restless. Instead of closing a cycle, the race had opened a deeper door, one that led to memories he had kept buried beneath layers of adrenaline and distraction. Back in Curitiba, training remained intense. The team celebrated his results. Sponsors talked about contract renewals. Yet, Luan was somewhere else. During sessions, his focus wavered. At night, he had dreams of that final sprint where he fell injured. He felt the pain again. Not in his leg, but in his soul. Camila noticed the change in a video call. His smile had faded. He spoke in short sentences. His eyes didn't meet the camera. When she asked what was wrong, he only said he was tired. But she knew. There was something there he hadn't yet faced. Something heavier than he was willing to admit. That's when Tiago Moretti, his mentor and now close friend, made a suggestion. He invited Luan to spend a weekend at a psychological performance center for athletes. The facility, nestled deep in the hills of southern Brazil, was a refuge used by high-performance professionals to deal with emotional blocks. Luan hesitated, then accepted. Somewhere inside, he knew there were things he needed to confront. The center was quiet, surrounded by forests and winding trails. It had bright, open spaces filled with natural light. No screens, no simulators. Just Luan, his own body, and time. The exercises were deceptively simple. guided walks, written reflections, emotional simulations. On the second day, Luan was asked to write a letter to his younger self. Not the champion. The boy who had fallen that cloudy day. At first, he resisted. Said he had nothing to say. But that night, alone on the cabin porch, pen in hand, the words started to flow. He wrote about pain, about the loss, about fear, but also about recovery. About the night he discovered he could race again, even through a screen. About Camila. About the silence of his father, and his eventual nod of pride. When he finished, his hands trembled. And for the first time in a long while, Luan cried. Not from physical pain, but from an emotional wound he had never dared let bleed. The next morning, during a guided meditation, something unexpected happened. Luan envisioned a different kind of track. Not made of dirt or asphalt, but memories. The curves were key moments. The straights, moments of hope. And in the center of it all, ran a version of himself, wearing a uniform that blended past and present. The image was symbolic, but powerful. When he opened his eyes, he felt lighter. Back in Curitiba, something had shifted. In the first race after his retreat, Luan drove with renewed clarity. His reflexes were sharper. His instincts more precise. He broke the season's fastest lap record. The team noticed. Tiago noticed. Even Camila, during a call, told him he seemed whole. Then came another anonymous message. No sender. No profile. Just a single sentence. The soul runs free when it accepts every fall. This time, Luan didn't freeze. He smiled, knowing. Maybe Phantom had never been someone else. Maybe he was never an opponent at all. Maybe he was the race Luan had always needed to win. As Luan prepares for the Sim Racing World Championship, a surprise visit from someone linked to his past will offer him a proposal that could change the course of his life once again. Chapter 7. The Final Start. The preparation for the Sim Racing World Championship was more intense than anything Luan had ever faced. The competition would bring together the top 20 virtual racers on the planet, and for the first time, he would officially represent Brazil as a starter. Weeks before the event, the team began simulations of legendary tracks like Suzuka, Spa-Francorchamps, and Interlagos. Everything was carefully planned: technical guidance, mental training, and physical balance. But even with all that structure, Luan felt something deeper at stake. On the eve of his trip, an unexpected visitor arrived at the team headquarters. Eduardo Almeida, a physiotherapist and former athletics coach from the training center where Luan had run before his injury. In his 50s now, Eduardo still had the look of someone who had spent decades working next to athletes. The moment he entered, the room fell silent. The staff didn't know him, but Luan did. It wasn't just a face from the past. It was a symbol of everything he had once left behind. Eduardo explained that he'd followed Luan's digital career from the beginning. He always believed in Luan, not just as an athlete, but as a competitor with soul. And then he revealed his reason for coming. He was now involved in a biomechanical project to develop advanced prosthetics and support exoskeletons for severely injured runners. He wanted Luan to participate, not as a patient, but as a tester and ambassador. The idea of running again, physically, stunned him. He had made peace with that part of his life. He had learned to run through a screen, to rebuild himself through a digital path. But the mere thought of feeling real wind on his face again, it awakened something in him. Conflicted, Luan left for Paris. The championship would take place in a futuristic arena, with a live audience and broadcasts reaching millions. Upon arrival, he was greeted as a rising star. The setup was monumental. Isolation booths, climate control, state-of-the-art rigs. But Luan was distracted. Something inside him still ran parallel to the event. In the first stages of the championship, he advanced easily. In the second phase, more technical and strategic, he shone again, one of the few drivers to keep consistent performance across every track. When the semi-finals came, only 6 drivers remained. Among them was a name that caught Luan's attention, ER7, a Spanish debutante, bold, charismatic, and a social media sensation. The media instantly built a rivalry between the two. Their styles clashed. Luan was strategic and composed. ER7 was impulsive and daring. The semi-final duel between them was a show. Constant overtakes, calculated collisions, bold attempts. Luan won by 0.03 seconds. The crowd went wild. But the look ER7 gave him afterward wasn't one of defeat. It was respect. Almost as if he understood what it meant to race with ghosts. That night, Luan walked alone through Paris. He crossed the bridges over the Seine, listening to the silence and to his own heartbeat. He thought about Eduardo's offer, about Camila's message, "You've already won. Now run just for you." He imagined his father watching from home, probably listening to the radio like old times. And he thought about himself as a boy, barefoot on red dirt, arms open, wind on his face, believing the world was made for those who dared to run, even when everything said they couldn't. The day of the final came. The track would be Interlagos, chosen in honor of the Brazilian sensation of the season. Luan sat in the booth, adjusted his gloves, tightened his headset, gripped the wheel. When the lights went out, all thoughts vanished. Only the track remained. The race was epic. Rain simulation. Strategy changes. Accidents. Luan led, fell behind, overtook, lost ground. With 2 laps to go, he was third. But on the penultimate curve, he saw a narrow inside line, one no one dared take. He took it, passed 2 rivals, crossed the finish line. Champion of the world. The arena erupted. Commentators screamed. The team ran into the digital podium room. And for the first time, Luan let go completely. He cried. Not because of the title, but because he had finally understood. The most important race of his life had never been on asphalt or on screen. It had always been within. With the world title in hand and offers flooding in, Luan must decide: return to physical racing with cutting-edge tech, or stay as a legend of the digital track, knowing that either path could change his life forever. Chapter 8. Between Tracks and Possibilities. Winning the World Championship brought Luan a whirlwind of recognition. Specialized websites labeled him Brazil's digital driving phenomenon. Magazines compared his journey to that of Olympic athletes. Top brands reached out with sponsorship offers, media campaigns, appearances. But in the midst of the frenzy, Luan kept his feet on the ground, at least as firmly as someone who had spent the last few years racing between different realities could. Back in Brazil, he was greeted like a hero. Fans welcomed him at the airport with signs and banners. Among the crowd, Camila stood with a small hand-painted sign that read, "You've always run further than anyone." They embraced without words. They didn't need any. Over the next few days, Luan turned down interviews and public appearances. He asked his team for a break, claiming he needed to think. He returned to the countryside, to the house where it had all started. The room still had faded posters, a box of old medals, and the window from which he used to stare at the dusty roads. Marcos welcomed him calmly, without fanfare. Just told him the old wood stove still worked and breakfast would be ready early, like always. Sitting on the porch, Luan spent hours reflecting. The offer from Eduardo was still on the table. The project, now in advanced stages, used exoskeleton technology to assist athletes with serious injuries. The possibility of running again, physically, stirred something in him. But he also wondered, was there a point in going back? Hadn't he already found a new way to run? He took a walk to the place where he'd trained as a child. The path was overgrown, but he could still see the shape of his old track. He walked it slowly, as if stepping through a living memory. On a familiar bend, He knelt and touched the dirt, closed his eyes, and there, in that golden silence of late afternoon, he understood. It wasn't about choosing between real or virtual. Running was his essence, and essence doesn't depend on form. Back in the city, he gave Eduardo an answer. He would accept the role of ambassador and tester, but with a condition. He wouldn't leave the virtual world. He wanted to be a bridge between two tracks, to show the world that racing was for everyone, with legs or without, in simulations or on the ground, with muscle or with soul. Camila was the first to know. She cried when he told her, said he wasn't just a champion, he had become a beacon. In the following months, Luan split his time between sim training and physical rehab with the exoskeleton. At first, it was hard. His body resisted. The machine felt foreign. But his mind, now healed, guided every step with purpose. One day, without fanfare, he ran again. Not as fast, not as smoothly, but with the same fire as the boy who used to race between cassava fields. And that was enough. A documentary about his story premiered on a global streaming platform. Its title, Between Tracks and Possibilities. It became a sensation, inspired thousands of viewers around the world. In the final scene, Luan appeared walking along a rural track at sunset, wearing the exoskeleton. A narrator's voice read the final phrase. The finish line doesn't matter. If the heart still runs, you're still on the track. Years later, Luan became a coach for an inclusive team, athletes from both the physical and virtual worlds. He opened an institute dedicated to accessible racing. And in his hometown, the path where he had first trained was renamed Pista Luan Andrade. In the final chapter of his life story, we see him sitting alone in the bleachers. A young boy races past him, clumsy, but with that unmistakable spark in his eyes. Luan smiles, and without saying a word, he knows. The race was never about winning. It was always about continuing.